Alright, my friends, this is my presentation on direct instruction. My name is Edward Shepard. I always like to start out by defining the subject. What is direct instruction? Well, direct instruction is teaching students what you want them to know. I know, it's shocking. What an odd concept, but that's what it is. It's teaching students what you want them to know. Here's a quick test. What is direct instruction? I don't believe you got that right. That's right, it's teaching students what you want them to know. Well, what is it not? What is direct instruction not? Direct instruction is not having kids figure things out for themselves. I've got a question for you. It's probably too tough. Here's a quick little test. Let's see if any of you can get this right. Which of the following is direct instruction not? I don't believe it. You got that one? I was sure you were going to fail on this. But you're right. Direct instruction is not having students figure stuff out on their own. Let me talk about evidence of efficacy. It's just a fancy way of saying evidence that it actually works. There's a lot of evidence that direct instruction is superior to all other instructional methods, but the best piece of evidence is probably project follow-through. You guys, of course, all know what project follow-through was, because you don't. Okay, well, project follow-through was the largest and most expensive educational study in the history of the United States. It pitted different educational strategies against each other all over the US, and when all the smoke cleared, there was one clear winner, and that was direct instruction. Technique developed by Siegfried Engelmann. He's an interesting character, but we don't have time to go into that. Actual examples. I'd like to give you an actual example of using this, but the thing is I already did. That first part of the lesson was an example of a direct instruction lesson. But let me give you another. Now, in biology, students have to learn what semi-permeable means, what a semi-permeable membrane is. Now, if they're going to learn what a semi-permeable membrane is, it helps to start with this word, semi-permeable. So this is how I, in the past, have taught this word. I say this. We have to know this word, semi-permeable, because it's going to pop up on these tests all the time. So let me just tell you what it means. Let's get this out of the way. Semi-permeable means some things pass through it, some things don't. It's just that simple. Semi-permeable means some things pass through, some things don't. Now I'm going to ask you kids a question, and when I do, I want you to just think about the answer. Don't say it. I'm going to choose on random people. I'm going to ask, what does semi-permeable mean? And then I'm going to call on you, and we'll see if you can give me the answer. Now the answer is semi-permeable means some things pass through, some things don't. Okay, here we go. What does semi-permeable mean? Alice, what does semi-permeable mean? Oh my goodness, you got it correct. So proud of you. That's right, semi-permeable means some things pass through, some things don't. Okay? What does semi-permeable mean again? George, you weren't paying attention. Okay, I have to reteach this now. Semi-permeable means some things pass through, some things don't. Okay? I'm going to ask that one more time to 3 students, and if all 3 of you can answer correctly, we're going to move on. If not, I have to reteach this. So, what does semi-permeable mean? And that's the pattern. Okay, so I teach something, very small step. I immediately ask the students to prove that they know the material. If they know it, we move on to the next step. If they don't know it, I reteach what I just taught. Okay, so here's a very quick how-to do a direct instruction lesson. There's way more to it than this, but it's just a tiny little lesson, so I'm keeping it simple. You break whatever you want to teach into small steps. The steps should be as small as they need to be for your students. Some students can handle bigger steps. Some students need tiny, tiny baby steps. You teach one step and one step only. And immediately after teaching that step, you test the students on that one step. If they pass, then you can move on to the next step. If they fail, immediately you reteach it. Of course, there's a lot more to it. Now, the principles of design, the ideas behind why you do things the way you do in direct instruction are these. First, ideally, you would have a scripted lesson. So you would know exactly what to say and when to say it, and you would know exactly what to say when students get an answer right and what to say when they have a response that's wrong. You explicitly teach each step. You don't leave it up to chance. You don't leave it up to students to try to figure out how to do something. And here's why. First, let me tell you why ideally you use a scripted lesson. The thing is, it's really hard to manage a classroom and focus on good delivery when you also have to come up with the words that you need to say. So early in the design of direct instruction lessons, they came up with scripting out the lessons so that teachers would not have to think about every aspect of the lesson. The actual words, they didn't have to come up with those. Okay, so then you explicitly teach each step. Now, why do you do that? Now, here's the thing. If you give students a task where they are coming up with their own solution to a problem, their own procedure, they're going to go and they're going to make a lot of mistakes. And maybe they'll never get the right answer. So they've done a lot of work and they've done a lot of things that were incorrect, time wasting, and they came up with maybe some wrong conclusions. Maybe they came up with the right conclusion. The big problem is later, when you ask them about it, what are they going to remember? Are they going to remember the correct stuff, or all that incorrect stuff that they did on their way to find the correct stuff? Well, quite often, children remember the wrong stuff. It interferes. All the mistakes you made interfere with the correct conclusions that you reach. So we teach them each step of the way, guide them, so they go through the whole process of understanding something or doing something without making mistakes. And therefore, when they remember what they did, they've only got one thing to remember, and that's the correct procedure. Okay, another principle is that we want to give examples and explanations that are unambiguous, which means they have only one possible interpretation. Let me give you a little story about where things can go wrong with explanations. So a teacher is teaching a bunch of very young children how to count. And she says, this is how we count to 3. 1, 2, 3. That's how we count to 3. Now, can anyone count to 4? And all the hands go up. And she calls on the kid and she says, okay, Billy, count to 4 for me. And Billy says, 1, 2, 4. Interesting, Billy, that's not quite it. Can anyone else count to 5? Yes, 1, 2, 5. The students have learned that the rule to counting to a number is that you say 1, 2, and then that number. So this happens a lot with small children. They come up with interpretations of your explanation and your examples that are not correct, and you have to account for that. So an ideal explanation of something is one that the child cannot get the wrong understanding from. There's only one possible interpretation. So with counting, you have to show them that you count to numbers a different way. You have to show them the correct way, and you have to count to a whole bunch of different numbers. You can't just count to 3. Otherwise, they can have this misunderstanding. Okay, next principle is we teach each step to mastery before moving on. Now we want to make sure that the students completely understand each step of a process before we move on, so that they don't have these lingering misconceptions or lacunae, lacks of knowledge in their minds as we move on. How do you do that? Well, the only way to make sure that students are actually understanding what you're saying, what you're teaching, is to have frequent checks for understanding. So you teach one thing, you don't just move on, but you check to make sure that the students understood it before you move on. And that's the principle of design. Okay, there are more. Basically, direct instruction uses a lot of trial and error to figure out what works and what doesn't. But these are just some of the simpler principles of design. Okay, that is it for my presentation, my friends.